In Concept C, we're going to be focusing on ions. So we're going to be looking at how to differentiate between two types of ions, an anion and a cation. And we're also going to be able to describe how a gain or loss of electrons affects the charge of an ion. And you should also be able to, by the end of the lesson, have a basic understanding of how to calculate an ion's number of electrons. So now remember, up until now we've talked about the term atom, and that an atom indicates that the particle is neutral, so the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. Now an ion is different because it has a charge is no longer neutral. Atoms become ions by losing or gaining electrons. The number of protons and neutrons are not affected or changed, it's only by the electrons because those are on the outside of the atom. The number of protons and electrons are no longer equal, which is what gives the ion a charge. Now this can be a confusing concept for students because of this idea of losing or gaining electrons and how the charge actually works out. So when we think of chlorine as an atom, meaning that the protons and electrons are equal, since the positive and negative charges are equal, we know it's neutral. Now when we take away an electron, so here we have 17 protons and 16 electrons, we have 17 positive charges and 16 negative charges. So our positive charges are greater than our negative charges. So our overall charge is positive. So when we take away a negatively charged particle, the electron, our overall charge is positive. Now the opposite is true if we gain an electron. In this case, we have 17 protons, we've gained an electron, so we have 18 negative charges. Our negative charges, or negative particles, are greater than our positive. So when we gain an electron, our overall charge of an ion is negative. Again, can be pretty confusing for students, so you want to maybe either rewind and listen to it a couple more times, or make sure in class tomorrow when you're practicing this that you keep on kind of self-talking to yourself about what is happening to the charge when you lose or gain. So our positive ions are called cations. These have lost electrons. So again, positive ions have lost electrons. And again, that's because when we take away electrons, we take away negative charges, we're left with an overall positive charge. One way to remember that positive ions are called cations is the phrase "be positive about your cats." So these are two examples, sodium and calcium, of positive ions or cations. So let's see if we can use this information, this symbol, to figure out protons, neutrons, and most importantly in this concept, electrons. So our protons are determined by the element, strontium. So our atomic number is 38. Our number of neutrons, we're going to use our mass number of 88 minus 38 to get our number of neutrons is 50. And then finally, to get the electrons, we're going to look at this positive 2. Since the charge is plus 2, this means that 2 electrons were lost. We have 2 less electrons than protons. So our number of electrons is equal to 36 since our protons were originally 38. Our negative ions are called anions. These have gained electrons. So negative ions have actually gained negatively charged electrons. And again, this is because as we gain electrons, our overall negative charge outweighs our positive charge. So one way to remember that negative ions are called anions is the phrase an anion is a negative ion. And you can see how that spells out there. So chlorine and phosphorus are two examples of negative ions or anions. So here we can work backwards. If we're given protons, neutrons, electrons, we can determine a bunch of information about our ion. So our protons gives us our element, iodine. Our neutrons and protons can give us our mass number of 126, which we put in the upper left-hand corner. And then we have to compare our protons and electrons to get our charge. So since there's one more electron than protons, our charge is -1. And you can see our completed symbol there for iodine ion. So here's just a couple practice. Pause it, check your answers to see how you do, and then come to class with your questions. So what is the charge on a magnesium ion that has lost 2 electrons? Since I've taken out 2 negative charged particles, I'm left with a +2 charge, so a +2 charge. All right, what is the charge on a fluoride ion that has gained 1 electron? So if I added in 1 negatively charged particle, that means my ion has a -1 charge. All right, and then finally we're going to write the chemical symbol for an ion. So write it when it's formed, when oxygen gains 2 electrons. So again, gaining 2 negative particles means I have a -2 charge. However, in example 4, aluminum loses 3 electrons. I've taken out 3 negatively charged particles, so I'm left with a +3 charge. Okay, we're going to work on this a lot tomorrow, so if you're having trouble understanding, the negative and positive charges and how they come about, just make sure you star those parts in your notes, and we'll go over it tomorrow.